today. This is just a reminder that today's presentation will be recorded and posted on the Whitburn Center's website and YouTube channel. We ask that you please keep your mics on mute. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. My name is Lisa Lewis, and I'm the Administrative Manager in the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about the Whitburn Center. The Whitburn Center was established in the fall of 2021 through a generous donation from our founding benefactor, UWO alumni Jerry Whitburn. Our mission is to conduct nonpartisan, practical, applied research focused on elevating and improving governance, professional management, and public policy in Wisconsin and beyond. Our vision is to build local government, nonprofit, and community capacity to promote the common good. To do this work, it requires bringing people together in spaces like this one to work together to share knowledge and equip public professionals with tools and resources to better understand the dynamic topic areas surrounding Wisconsin's public sector. And now I'll turn things over to Dr. Michael Ford.
All right, can you hear me now? So, is Kate here yet, Zurn, or no? All right, well, hopefully Kate shows up. Otherwise, you're going to be treated to too much of us. But I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here. There we go. And I got about 15 minutes. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
All right, and you can hear me, Lisa?
Yes.
All right. Oh, thank you, Diane. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project we did over last summer, and that will continue going on under the leadership of Dr. Sam Larson and some others, our work of the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust. So if people don't know me, my name is Michael Ford. I was the director of the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research up until last Friday. I am now a senior faculty affiliate. I think that's the correct term with the Whitburn Center, but also the director of the Wisconsin Institute for Citizenship and Civil Dialogue. So I'll start off kind of broadly before I get into the specifics of what this project was about and why we did it. So the chart you're looking at here is research from the Pew Research Center tracking national surveys going back to 1960 to the end of the Biden administration. A real simple question. Percentage of people of a representative sample in the United States who say they trust government to do what is right, either always or about always or most of the time. So we see, it's kind of shocking to me to look at this just around 1960 that 75% or so of a representative sample of Americans said they trusted government. Given where we're at today and just the general state of our discourse, which we're changing, but it's pretty amazing to me to think that there was ever a time where 75% of Americans were on the same page in trusting the work of government. We see some slides there over through the 70s, Watergate, et cetera. A little bit of a recovery in the 80s, a decline in the start of the 1990s, and then it starts to recover. We see a bump after September 11th attacks in 2001, then a steady decline, and we've been hovering around this 20% mark since that time. And yes, this is national, but if you look at local surveys, whether it's in the state of Wisconsin or elsewhere, we have a general low level of trust in government. And I would go further, even though this survey is looking specifically at government, general trust in institutions has gone down, general trust in civil society. And as I'll make the point in a minute, in a democratic society, declining trust in government can be interpreted as declining trust in one another. So here's a fancy graph I put together. I guess this is a chart, not a graph. But the point I want to get across here is that trust is really important and intrinsically tied to the performance of our government. It's all about the linkages. When we have a high level of trust in our government, we have a stable government. Stability is so important in government, especially in a pluralistic society where people are in disagreement about their core values. because it enables us to get long-term things done, like infrastructure, progression of civil rights, etc., despite our disagreements. We have the ability to navigate it within stable institutions. When we have that stability, we should expect to see a high-performing government. And by that, I just mean a government that's capable of meeting the needs of those it serves. Government is a human-driven enterprise. It exists to serve human needs. If we're meeting those human needs, people are naturally going to view their government as legitimate. So this is all good, right? If we have high levels of trust, it reinforces stability, performance, legitimacy. Each one of these four circles reinforces everything else. Now, the problem is anytime we have a weakness or a weak point in any of these buckets, things start to get nasty. So distrust and disengagement, and that gets at that first slide I showed you with declining trust. Well, when people don't trust their government, when people don't trust their institutions, they might look outside of their institutions or outside of their government for change or to get their needs met. Certainly there can be instability where we have these wild swings in political leadership. But the worst case scenario is you start to see political violence. People saying that, okay, we got to look outside of our existing institutions, outside of our longstanding democratic processes to affect the political change that we want to see. And oftentimes that means that we have political change that is beneficial to a subgroup at the expense of the whole. So we kind of lose that idea of the common good when we have this instability in political violence. And certainly if we don't have stability or kind of worst case scenario, seeing political violence, well, we're going to have poor performance in government because we don't have that stability to actually accomplish long-term goals. And if you have a government that's not working for you, you're probably not going to view it as legitimate. And if you don't view your government as legitimate, your institutions, well, you're not going to trust it. You might disengage, cede that space to people who maybe want to be involved in politics or in governing for reasons that are maybe not consistent with advancement of the common good. All kinds of challenges here, and I do think that the cornerstone of this is trust. So some more data before I dig into the specifics of the WISAC project. But there's a lot of evidence that our system is stressed. And for folks on this call that know me, I love Bob Dylan, and you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. That's a nice Bob Dylan quote. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know here. But if we look at some of the data out there, 2024, Georgetown University did a poll, a national representative poll, and 81% of those respondents, and this crossed ideological lines, so it didn't matter if you were conservative or liberal, that common concern was expressed that U.S. democracy is under threat. And that really scares me. It scares me that the thing that unifies us across all of our ideological lines is that we're worried about the state of our democracy, because that's not necessarily a unifying. I guess it's hard to rally around that if we're all in agreement that things are going to hell. Here in Wisconsin, 2021, Marquette University, the Charles Franklin poll, found that 71% of Republicans in the state did not have confidence in the 2020 election results. That same poll showed that 60% of Wisconsin residents stopped talking politics with people with whom they disagreed. So this is kind of a toxic, scary situation here, where people think that democracy is under threat. They all agree. We have sizable numbers of individuals, especially that are aligned with one political party, that are worried or don't have trust in the very institutions of democracy, the most basic institutions, our electoral results. And then we have 60% of our residents saying that they're checking out. We're not even comfortable talking about it. So where do we go from here? And I said it before, and this sounds idealistic, but I think I want to sound idealistic here, that if we're losing trust in our democratic system and our ability to govern ourselves, we're really losing trust in one another. So this is the backdrop of this project that we're going to learn more about. So we had three broad goals. We wanted to define the threats to democracy in the state of Wisconsin, specifically around trust in elections and the risk of political violence, further political violence. We wanted to identify those barriers to civil democratic discourse in Wisconsin. Why aren't people capable of talking to one another, especially folks with whom they disagree? And then we wanted to give people tools, empower Wisconsin residents and communities to restore trust in our democratic processes and institutions. And we think the path to do that is civic engagement, getting people involved. Um, we were able to do this work through some generous donations from the Carter Center, Herb Cole Philanthropies, and then as well as support from the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust itself, which is moving to the Whitburn Center, and then in-kind work contributions from the Whitburn Center here at UWO. So the logistics here over the last summer is we held these 5 listening sessions between June 8th and August 17th, 2024. We specifically housed these or hosted these across the state. So we had one in Oshkosh, Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, in Green Bay. And that was strategic. We didn't want it to just be a Milwaukee and Madison thing, and we didn't want to ignore parts of the state. The sessions were invite only, and I'll give you a list of the types of folks that we invited in the next slide, but it was a 2-hour long conversation. It was moderated by some 2-bit moderator. It was myself. And it was based on a semi-structured script. So we had an idea of the types of questions we wanted to ask these individuals, but we really wanted to listen. And we recorded these and we created transcripts. We guaranteed everybody that their names and participation would remain anonymous, but we were able to include some details of the types of people we invited. Now, we very purposely did not try to get a cross-section or a representative sample of the Wisconsin electorate. We were targeting grass tops. And if you don't know what grass tops means, it's people who are in leadership positions in their community who could give us useful information and hopefully accurate information about the state of civic engagement and democracy in their communities. So we had 32 participants in these 5 different sessions. 56.3% were male, 84.4% were white. I'd say the more diverse sessions were the Milwaukee and Madison ones, which does mirror the communities more closely. And we certainly sought ideological diversity. We wanted to get as many different types of individuals with different viewpoints in those focus groups. We used a lot of our personal connections and just the broader UWO MPA network, our friends, et cetera, kind of a snowball sample to get people to come. And we were able to get some pretty interesting individuals in the room. We had current and former members of the Wisconsin State Legislature, people running for state and local office, current people holding local office, city managers. We had journalists from local newspapers. We had folks representing prominent public policy think tanks, both right-leaning and left-leaning. We had leaders from the Republican and Democratic parties, specifically at the county level. We had advocacy organizations, some private developers, election clerks. We had a really interesting group of people. Full disclosure, the folks that were hardest to get and probably were least represented were the folks most skeptical about the 2020 election results. We did get folks that were closely aligned with some of those movements that didn't trust the 2020 election results, but I'd say they were underrepresented compared to the rest. So what were the major themes? What did we find? A couple things stood out. First off, the folks in the room, when we asked them if they expected more political violence, it was just almost universal. I think there was one person that said no. Everybody was like, yep, more stuff's going to happen. And I guess more terrifying was just that this group of people, most of whom were in a public-facing position and had some prominence in their communities, all said they had experienced some type of threat of violence in their official position. It was a really sobering reminder of kind of the state of our discourse and the normalization of our discussion of violence around politics. And I'll also add that in the midst of these focus groups, we had the attempt on then candidate Trump's life in Pennsylvania. So that certainly became a major discussion point. I believe that was after I think we had 2 sessions before that occurred. A second major theme voiced by our participants was this desire for civil discourse. People were in favor of civil dialogue. They wanted to have civil discourse, But when we dug a little deeper, even within the room, there was disagreement about what that actually meant. Some folks were more on the freedom of speech side that, yeah, we just have to be able to listen to everybody no matter what they have to say. But then we had pushback from folks, especially some folks in historically underrepresented communities saying that, yeah, that's really easy for you to tell me to behave in a civil manner when I'm struggling to make ends meet or I'm being discriminated against. So it made for a very rich, interesting conversation. There was a lot of agreement on point 3 that there is a link between the risk of political violence in Wisconsin and this broader cultural decline in the normalization of violence in our culture. People were talking about school shootings and mass shootings that occur in the United States, and how that, yeah, if we're seeing this stuff in different parts of our culture, why wouldn't we see this in our politics? A lot of discussions about the lack of trusted information sources, a lot of frustration voiced about the rise of social media and how to get back to a place of common truth and common facts. The people in the room generally said they trusted elections, but also said that there was a lot of concerns in their community and a lot of distrust within their community. Um, But even within the room, there were some people skeptical. There was one individual, I think it was a great example, who said that, yeah, in my county, I trust elections because I know the clerk, but I don't trust what's happening in Milwaukee and Brown County. And I asked, what would it take to get you to trust? And the individual said, well, nothing. I will never trust the results coming out of Green Bay and Milwaukee. I said, that's a really hard place to start from. But it was real. It was out there. And then this broader concern that potential candidates are tuning out of politics and public life. So this broader idea of disengagement, that, yeah, we recognize we have these problems, and the people that are perhaps most poised to solve these problems are not getting involved in politics because, well, you see those quotes down there. It can be a sore place where people are subject to threats and just not a pleasant experience. So it was, again, an incredible experience. I think we learned a lot. And Dr. Larson is going to talk a bit later about our recommendations. But first, we're going to turn it over to, I believe, Kate Zurn from the Conflict Resolution Center, who built on our work to hold de-escalation training specifically tied to our findings that were really, I thought, successful and awesome, and also posted on our website. And Kate's cool too. So I will shut up and I will turn it over to Kate.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Mike. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you all can see my screen as well. I apologize if there is any background noise. Hopefully there's not too much. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint? All right, thank you. Okay, so I am going to give you a quick 10-minute or less overview of the workshops that we had done. And these were 2-hour workshops, so this is really going to be keeping it pretty snappy here and just keeping it to the true highlights. So as Mike said, it was, we titled it Overcoming Our Ideological Divides. And to us, it was very much about how do you have de-escalation and to make room for civil discourse in that. So we first started talking about some of the damage of the political hot takes environments that we've been seeing. So, we were talking about the problem first that helped with some of the listening sessions and research that Mike and his team had done. And so we were, talking about how the judgmental headlines, the social media posts, the spread of misinformation, all of that served to stifle civil discourse. And so we dug into that a bit more in terms of how it paints us into this world of false dichotomies, where we're in our echo chambers, we're looking for confirmation bias, and we're really starting to see each other as an us versus them. We went through different examples in our nation's history where this did not work. This framework of the either or is very damaging and to our democracy, where the erosion of civil discourse being the erosion of democracy itself. And so, again, we try to help everyone in the room understand the call to action, if you will, in this, and then focus on how the topic of the workshop itself was how to de-escalate those charged topics and nurture civil discourse. So the agenda we had followed was in primarily two parts. So part one was covering the fundamentals of why these topics become escalated in the first place, why we typically approach these topics poorly, and then how to de-escalate the situation. Part two is where we went through it much faster once we had those fundamentals built with everyone. And that's when we talked about literally how to have the civil discourse conversation and how to truly connect while having that. So just to give you some of the highlights of what covering those topics looked like. We first talked about what gets in the way. So, we talk about how, we don't have civil discourse, and we dug into why don't we have it? Why is it so easy to say things like the phrases on the slide here, to judge and dismiss people when things get escalated, when we enter into disagreements, saying things like, they're such an idiot, they're not worth my time, different things like that, where we really just put people in a box saying you're not worth listening to, and then we shut down. And so we had to first overcome that reflex to judge and dismiss and instead have patience so that we could de-escalate the situation. So in order to build that patience, we had to build a bit of perspective. So we turned to Maslow's hierarchy of needs that shows our different levels of fundamental needs that we can all relate to as human beings, with the most basic being at the bottom, working all the way to self-actualization at the top. And so Maslow's hierarchy is an extremely helpful framework in understanding why people behave the way that they do. And what we really drew out in the workshop is the connection between Maslow's hierarchy and typical political topics. And we were able to see that political topics really tend to hit hard on our fundamental needs as people. And as we explored that more, we were able to see such as the first level of needs, abortion, sexual offenses, pollution, climate change, all of those things hit on our physiological needs as people. And so when our needs are threatened or we perceive that they're being threatened, things can escalate very quickly. So it was helping to draw that connection for folks to realize that the topics that are just the political hot charge topics that we have day to day in our politics and news are really hitting at the core of what we need as people. We also walked through the different things that hit on the safety needs, such as gun control and violent crime, the economy, as well as love and belonging needs, LGBTQ+, immigration, etc. Again, just really highlighting the fact that these political topics, it makes sense that they become escalated because they're hitting on things that are just so important to us. So that was one perspective that we explored together as a group. Another was that our perception is our reality. So usually when we are engaging in some sort of civil discourse or a difficult topic has been brought up, someone feels threatened because they think they might need to change their mind on this. And so it was exploring the perspective that when someone's asking you to change your mind, they're really asking you to change your world because our perception is our reality. And with any change, inevitably you suffer some form of loss. And especially when it's a change in how you view political topics and how fundamentally they relate to our lives. So maybe it's respect for someone you cared for that you lost if you change your mind. Maybe it's the camaraderie with your friend group, because maybe now if you change your mind, you're going to be the odd one out. Different things like that. Those are losses that are scary for people to face. And, people can become very defensive, not wanting to risk those losses. And so that was the first part, as we said. So why things become escalated, we explored some of those perspectives. Another way to build understanding is exploring why we typically approach these topics poorly. Why is our default not civil discourse, essentially? And so we covered a couple different continuums here, such as our attitude towards conflict and how usually we all graduate our youth and enter our adult lives having a relatively poor attitude towards conflict. We think of it as a bad thing. It makes us feel uncomfortable. We don't know how to navigate it, or we kind of like the thrill of the fight. And so this is where few of us are taught to have a very neutral, pragmatic perspective on conflict and discourse. And so that can negatively impact our situation and lead to escalated situations as well. So it helps to strive towards a neutral attitude that lends towards, the calm and grit needed to have that civil discourse. But few of us begin life to doing that. And it's a lot of work to build that skill set. And then not only is it our attitude, but it's also our default reaction. And so once again, we can see how, you can go all the way from avoiding conflict to accommodating those that you see as attacking, all the way to attacking yourself. And it's a learned placement based on our experiences. And so it was first recognizing we have default attitudes and reactions to conflict. That's how we can have that core deconstructive, destructive response to conflict. And then what we did as a group is we talked about, why do we have that? Why do we have those core default actions? And how can we be more compassionate towards other people in terms of why they might be acting the way they do, why they might be believing things that they do that we fundamentally disagree with. So we talked through the ladder of inference. And so it's a very detailed framework where it helps you to understand how we form our beliefs that ultimately lead to our actions, and how we connected this to a political example, essentially with how, in terms of political disengagement. So it was that you and I are political opponents, and I disengage with your political hot take. And now, maybe some people might think, well, you just don't care about our nation. You don't care about getting into the thick of this and doing the hard work. And it really goes down in this example to say, in this scenario, that I disengaged because I couldn't handle the inflammatory language that was being used because of the verbal abuse I had experienced as a child. And so again, it's helping people to extend that grace towards each other, to extend that compassion, so that they can try to remember that they're really talking to another human being here that deserves to be listened to and to be communicated with. And so we had covered this topic, and then a simpler framework that we said, but that was a good practical tool, was the rule of 6. And so maybe you can't remember the entire ladder of inference in the moment, but you can remember the rule of 6. And so it's thinking of 6 reasons why people might act or think the way that they do. And so again, a practical tool here that I'm flying through because we only have so much time. And then this was an example of an exercise that we would do throughout the workshop. So again, it was a lot of interaction with all the folks who were there. And then we talked about how to de-escalate. So we talked about how your mindset and the mindset to go into conflict with. We talked about the concept of storm versus calm, which is a concept that we use a lot in conflict resolution in terms of how people typically behave in their default styles when things are going wrong and when they're going well, and how we can help people shift from storm to calm and be able to have that conversation. And so we had this beautiful exercise on yielding and redirecting and how to do that with words. And so it all ultimately related to showing curiosity, letting yourself be moved by the other person, listening for their interests, really becoming in tune with each other and what people want and why they want it. Then proving that we listen, consciously addressing that turning point of, I hear you and I can understand the feelings that you're having now. And then looking to the future and gently redirecting that focus. And then we talked about what the conversation looks like itself. This is really, really speedy going through all of this, but essentially you would be starting with that clear intention, opening with curiosity, respecting the past, but focusing on the future. So what that looks like in words and what it sounds like is, I'm curious to understand your perspective on the election. What are your thoughts on the candidates? What inspired you to think that about them? And what are your hopes for the future regarding our nation? And so it helped to give people a framework that once we had all those fundamentals covered, then how do you have that conversation? What are some of the words that you can use and fall back on? And that was it. And hopefully 10 minutes or less. And I will have to hop off this call, but if anyone has any questions for me afterwards, please feel free to share my contact information and I'm happy to help however I can.
Thank you, Kate. Kate is, I think, at Leadership Oshkosh right now. Is that right?
Yes.
So she like took her lunch break to be with us today. So thank you for joining us. And I did put the Resolution Center's website in the chat for folks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Sam, I believe you're up.
Actually, before me, I want to bring Liv into the conversation. So one of the things that we wanted to do is highlight, so the participants of the de-escalation workshops, so we had those at UW Oshkosh, UW Green Bay, and UW Milwaukee. And Liv is a student research assistant with the Whitburn Center this year, sociology student, all around rock star, and has been really involved with a lot of this work. And so we wanted to just ask Liv from a student perspective to talk a little bit about the experience with WISACT, the de-escalation trainings, and then just anything else she wants to share before I jump in. So go ahead, Liv.
Yeah, hi. Wow, thanks for such a great introduction, Sam. So yeah, I had the opportunity to attend the political discourse de-escalation workshop, and I went to the WISAC de-escalation facilitation as well. And so some things that really resonated with me were that in our increasingly like polarized society, I've come to realize that how we talk to each other about civic issues is just as important as what we say. And so the workshop showed me that civil discourse isn't about avoiding disagreement, but it's about engaging with it, so like more constructively. And so there were like three things that stood out to me that I'll share with you guys. And so the first one was listening to understand and not to respond. So when someone shares a perspective that's different than my own, it's very natural or natural to often prepare to rebuttal rather than to truly hear someone for what they have to say. And so I learned that by shifting my focus to genuine understanding, I can create a more meaningful exchange rather than having parallel viewpoints or parallel dialogue. And so the second thing that I really took that resonated with me was recognizing our shared humanity. And so with that, behind every political position, like Kate just talked about, is a person with values, concerns, and hopes just like ourselves. And so the workshop taught me to ask what might like make a reasonable, decent person hold this type of value that I don't necessarily hold myself. And so that question that Kate talked about that I learned from the workshop has been pretty transformative in how I've approached conversations when it comes to difficult topics. And then the third thing that really stood out to me is just embracing complexity. The most significant issues that our communities are facing and that we're facing today do not have simple solutions. And so we learn that a lot in sociology through, and I've learned that a lot through my internship too, doing a lot of different things with the Whitburn Center. And so acknowledging this complexity can really move us beyond that like us versus them mentality and thinking towards collaborative problem solving rather than just battling each other constantly. And so yeah, I found that practicing these principles and these like three ideas doesn't mean compromising my own values either, but rather allowing me to advocate for them while effectively being able to maintain relationships that are different and that aren't the same. And so as I am navigating becoming a young adult and becoming an active community member, I think that the approaches that I learned through the civic discourse have helped me learn to build society where disagreement doesn't lead to division and where different perspectives can really strengthen our government rather than become a threat to collective decision making. So that's a lot that I took from it, and I'm pretty sure I'm trying to keep it brief. I don't want to keep talking because I could talk all day. But yeah, that's my reflection from it. I'm pretty sure I pass it to Sam now.
Yep, that's right. That's right. Well, and before I'll just mention to everybody here today. So I'm going to walk through essentially the recommendations from the report that Mike had mentioned before. One of them was the de-escalation trainings. So that's why we wanted to bring that in here. But we had 6 different recommendations. Before I get to that, I just want to reflect on Liv's reflection. So Liv, I think one of the things, having the like joy and pleasure of having Liv work with us over the last several months at the Whitburn Center, is just like seeing her fully embrace and engage in this work, and just to see her critical thinking skills and her emotional intelligence and her positive approach to addressing like really some of the most challenging problems that we're facing. It's just been really like a joy to see. And for everyone on this call, Liv is graduating this spring and is on the job market. So she's an awesome person. I just want to throw that out there and take
Thank
the
you,
opportunity. Yeah, to let folks know that she is looking to solve your problems for you come this May. But let me jump in. I'll just share one more little presentation with all of you. And again, I mentioned this at the very, very beginning. I'm battling a cold, so I apologize for being a little nasally here. But I will open this up and walk through the kind of recommendations that we have. And so from the report, again, the first recommendation that we came up with was really looking at how community leaders can attend these de-escalation trainings, either provided by WISACT or other organizations doing this work to help them better engage in difficult political conversations. And so these are just photos of the de-escalation trainings that Kate led us through. We had a really good turnout. We had about 50 people in Oshkosh come from the community and from campus. Similar numbers, I believe, in Green Bay. And then our first event in Milwaukee also brought kind of a broad mix of people together. And so that was the first thing that came out of our listening sessions. The second piece that really came from recommendations from the listening sessions were how individuals, there's really a call to serve as election volunteers, really demonstrating that that's how people really can understand how elections actually work. And that actually builds trust in elections themselves. And then there was related to that kind of this call for municipal clerks and associations like the Wisconsin Municipal Clerks Association to take more proactive steps to educate people who are skeptical of elections on really like the nuts and bolts of how elections are administered. And so again, I just want to take the opportunity to let you all know election observers are needed for the upcoming election on April 1st. And so one way to do that, I have the information here. You can sign up with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. You don't have to be a member, or you can contact Eileen and they will walk you through a training and then try to set you up with one of your like a election clerk in kind of your geographic region in the state. So that's one way to get involved. But we're also hoping to host a Whitburn Wednesday event later this summer on the nuts and bolts of election administration. So I'll be reaching out to people from the Wisconsin Elections Commission. We have a ton of students from our Masters of Public Administration program who serve as clerks or have formerly served as clerks. Who I'd like to reach out to talk about their experiences with this. And then she's actually on the call today. We have a current MPA student, Kayla Nessman, who's doing a capstone project on how elections can serve as one way that state and local government folks can kind of address some of the challenges that we're facing on a national level by really trying to educate folks and bring more awareness of how elections actually work to the broader public. The third recommendation that came from our report was focusing on legislation and how that can be used to improve administration. And so this is a report that was released after really in response to the 2020 election from the Wisconsin Legislative Audit Bureau. And so they put forward 30 recommendations for the Wisconsin Elections Commission and 18 kind of policy changes that could be put up for legislative consideration. So one example of that, it's a long report. I encourage you to read it. But one thing they looked at, that has come up as an issue is how absentee ballots are incorporated and certified. And so some of the recommendations they made were for the Wisconsin Elections Commission to do things like make sure that they're complying with statutes that require witnesses to print their names on absentee ballots. And then also making sure that municipal clerks understand the rules around this, and that they can correct or add missing witness address information that might be discovered on absentee ballots. And so those are just some examples. And then on the legislative side, they talked about how statutes could be modified to clarify whether or not clerks could correct errors, modifying statutes to require municipal clerks to verify signatures. So there's a number of items like that that have been addressed, but are continuing to be looked at as well. And so recommending more awareness of that throughout the state, and especially amongst municipal clerks. The fourth recommendation that we heard from our listening sessions was how nonpartisan election trainings that are conducted by neutral parties could really do a stronger service by educating more people on the role that elected officials have and how elections work. So here are just a couple of examples of that. The Fair Election Center, Braver Angels, and All Voting is Local. All of these organizations are national, but have representation within Wisconsin specifically. So I encourage all of you to check these out. And hopefully, as we move forward with WISACT, we're hoping to engage and partner with some of these folks more as well. The fifth recommendation that really stood out, I think was really salient and strong, was increasing civic education in K through 12 systems. And I would also say maybe K through 16 as well, but really focusing on how we can give our next generation the tools to fight misinformation and really understand, again, how government works and how elections work. So here, again, are just a couple of examples. The National Civics Bee this year is being held up in Appleton at Lawrence University. They're always looking for judges, so that's something folks could get involved with if they want to. The Central Wisconsin High School Leadership Program is another opportunity for high school age students who are interested in this type of work to get a stronger understanding and develop leadership skills, civic leadership skills specifically around this. And then a really great resource if you are in K through 12 education is icivics.org. They have a number of lesson plans that are available that you can kind of, replicate in your classroom. So another really great resource. And then last but not least, this one is kind of like, it's simple but complex, oddly enough, but local-based efforts to create space for social capital building in a really informal, non-political atmosphere that can strengthen bonds and trust and just kind of a sense of belonging between people in Wisconsin. So this can happen in a number of different ways. A couple of examples I wanted to share with you. So one is, there's been this kind of organization or initiative over the past several months by folks at George Mason University called the Pluralist Lab. And so this is like a facilitated kind of training where we're trying to build that muscle of engaging in civil dialogue. So we're not just automatically going to that place that Kate mentioned, where we're saying like, oh, that person just doesn't know what they're talking about, but really approaching conversations with curiosity. And so the photo up above is a number of people throughout the UW system who participated in a Pluralist Lab training to understand how to become facilitators. And then just on February 28th, recently, Liv was a facilitator for that with students throughout the UW system. And so again, just really understanding how to have conversations across the ideological spectrum. So these conversations are facilitated and organized around bringing people together who do have disagreements on issues like climate change or issues like housing, and having them have a facilitated conversation on how to actually talk about and understand where the other folks are coming from in the room. The other thing I wanted to mention is this initiative that's popped up through UW Extension Waupaca County. It's called the Social Joinery. And so this is really, I think, an incredible way to do this work, which is they're doing this where they're just having people come together without an agenda, but just to come together, gather, have some food and talk about what they hope for the future of their community. But there's no goal in mind. But it's a really interesting approach to this. I know that they were going to watch the documentary, and maybe they already did this, a documentary called Join or Die that focuses on how to build up social capital in your community. And so I think that that's another great example of, kind of like letting go of some of the heat around this and just really getting together person to person and having conversations about, what we want to do to make the communities that we live in and the people that we, are neighbors with, how to make things better for everyone. The last thing I'll mention, so if you're not familiar with the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust, I would just encourage you to join. It's really a simple way to demonstrate that you care about decreasing polarization in Wisconsin. And so there's over 400 people that have joined this over the last year. There is the website where you can simply just add your name to the list. And if you want to share your name publicly, a number of folks have done that. But really, it's just focused on the principles of working to build trust, support fair, safe, and secure elections, and encourage more peaceful engagement in our communities. So I wanted to end with that as well. And that is all I have. So I think that we have a good chunk of time. I'll throw that website in the chat, but it looks like we have a good chunk of time for questions or comments.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Larson. That was lovely. I was tasked with moderating the Q&A, and I'll do my best here. So if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand or to just chime in. And if you don't, I can get us started, as I am wont to do. So I guess I'll get us started. So Dr. Larson, something you said, or no, I think Liv said this, really resonated with me, that this challenge of embracing complexity and why that's so hard to do. And it struck me when Sam presented the recommendation about the Legislative Audit Bureau report, like going back to the 2020 election, why that nuance is so difficult to achieve, that we can say that things didn't go perfectly and there's always room for improvement without saying the results of an election are illegitimate. It seems like we get stuck in that arena, in so many arenas, just like one or the other, and no room for complexity. And I'm just curious as to why you think that is, if that's changed, and this goes to anybody, I suppose. Like, how did we get to this point? And if you have an idea of how to get out of it, that's great too. But I only ask the easy questions.
Well, I'll take the first shot at
Please.
and folks can get a view into the often day-to-day conversations of myself and Mike on what's going wrong and how we can fix it. But I do think it goes back to, the work that Kate presented. And again, it was good of her to try to fit everything in, a 2.5-hour session into 10 minutes. But one of the reasons we get here is because I think that we've gotten into really binary thinking, right or wrong. Right is kind of like, are you right or are you wrong? Are you with us or are you against us? So we're kind of in a space where, unfortunately, there's a lot of pitting against each other, which I think gets to Liv's point about how, embracing complexity is hard. Here's one question, I guess, and this is very far from an answer, but I think that the age that we're living in of constant information makes us think that we know things or should know things immediately. And so I think one of the things that, I think that these tools and the trainings are really helpful with, are helping us take that pause and step back and realize that, it takes time to get to the bottom of some of these things, rather than feeling, that adrenaline rush every time your phone gives you a new news story update or breaking news update. And so I think the media and kind of our thirst for knowing what's happening immediately is something that I'm really interested in pushing back on and helping kind of people build the skills to take a pause and say, like, what's actually going on here? But that's just me. I'm curious what other people might have to say. And I do see again, I see one student and one former student in the audience. And so I'm like pressing myself back from calling on them and asking them what they think.
It's a hard thing to do though, what you just described, and please, it doesn't have to be the Mike and Sam hour. But that's a hard, especially in I'm looking again, the folks on the call here, including our students. You're in a public facing position where people often expect you to have the answer right away. And if someone asks you a hard question when you're in a public position, like a clerk or like a city manager, like a department head, if your response is, I don't know, I need to think about that or ask around or figure out, that's a new one. Oftentimes the response from a resident is they don't know what they're doing. They're dumb, they're not qualified. So I do think there is even this professional kind of impulse or pressure to just to give an answer right away, always.
I can speak on that too.
Yeah, please, Liv.
I think there's a big fear of cancel culture as well in our society. So when it comes to not knowing and the unknown, it's a lot scary, especially for like my generation and like growing up in a world that's so divided. It's easy to get canceled for saying anything, and it's scary. It's a scary time. And so in my experience, I think, like Sam said, I think everyone needs to attend a pluralist lab because I have never learned so much in such a short amount of time, and it was very confidence building. I felt very confident after, and I felt confident enough to facilitate as well, and so. I think a big thing that Sam talked about and that we learned through the Mercatus Center was that we as a society have lost our ability to engage with each other civically and about social issues. And their big thing was about strengthening the muscle that we have just as we strengthen ourselves by walking every day, by going to the gym, stuff like that. Their big thing is practicing having these conversations in an area where you feel confident. And I think that it's okay to mess up in those scenarios and maybe not say the right thing sometimes, and also have like those facilitators there to kind of like guide the conversation from going south. And I think it's just so important to do that. And so I just wish that everybody could experience something like that at some point. I think that it would ultimately, if it was like something that was implemented in school systems, like Sam said, about the ideas, teaching students how to engage more civically with each other. I think that would be so transformative for teaching our youth, and it would make our youth want to know more about politics rather than kind of being like, oh, I don't want to lean either way, like I want to be in the middle. I think that if it started from a younger age, K through 12, K through 16, it would be so much more beneficial for our future. So that's my viewpoint on that.
Oh, well said, Liv. No, I have to say this because I'm doing my part today. It's take your child to work day here. It's a virtual learning day, so I'm making my 15-year-old suffer through this. So at least one kid in Oshkosh is going to be exposed to these concepts. But Kayla, go ahead. You got your hand raised.
Yeah, so I kind of just wanted to chime in off of both yours and like Dr. Larson's points you were making about kind of like having all of the answers for people. So like as a clerk, it's kind of my, part of my responsibility and expectation where, I'm responsible for all of our elections, and I kind of am like that go-to person where you need to almost know everything, but I don't know everything. There's so much stuff when it comes to elections. So many things are constantly changing, and I have a really great team of people here with me who I'm constantly asking questions to. And oftentimes when residents come in, I don't always know the answer. And so I'm always open to having, civic discourse with people saying like, hey, I'm not totally sure, but I'm going to get you the answer to that. Whether that's talking with the Wisconsin Elections Commission or talking with other clerks in the area. So one really great thing about like being a clerk is that there's such a good community of clerks, and that we always kind of have each other's backs, and we know that we can talk to them whenever we have questions. So yeah, just building off of that, where it's okay to not know everything. Like I certainly don't. But just being open to telling people like, hey, I don't have that information. And just being honest with people, like, hey, that's not something I know at the moment, but I am gonna dig into that for you and get back to you as soon as I can. Because especially when it comes to elections and with how contentious things are, sometimes residents just expect us to have all of the information. And if we don't, then there are those accusations of, well, you're holding a fraudulent election, or you're doing this, or you're doing XYZ. So just trying to be really open and honest with people, and just being accountable for what information you do and don't know is really important.
Well said, Kayla. Kathy, I noticed you unmuted. Just curious, you have a question or a comment?
Oh, goodness.
Oh, no, you're okay. Do you have a comment or a question, Kathy?
I guess well, if I can get rid of the picture, I do have a comment because, oh, I see Zach Kessler is on the call. He's from Wauwatosa as well. I so appreciate what you're doing. And I would love to be able to bring into our community these gaining more knowledge about elections, because I'm the former mayor of Wauwatosa. And I have found that the lack of understanding by people of the fact that things are far more complex than black and white causes so much of the disagreement and distrust that we're experiencing. And so I personally am working on trying to figure out how to communicate better down into our neighborhoods and help people, feel more trustful that way as well.
Kathy, I will be reaching out to you because part of the kind of next phase for WISACT is really going out and building these teams that can do this type of work regionally. And so both you and Zach, I have Zach's contact info. Zach's one of our star grads here. So would be happy to reach out to you in the weeks ahead and talk about some of the trainings and events we're trying to do out in the communities across the state this summer is our hope.
That would be fantastic. Should I put my email in the chat?
Yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely.
All right, will do.
Great. And thank you for the question and for coming too. We're happy to have folks here that are doing this work on the ground. And hi, Zach.
Hi, Dr. Larson. Hi, Dr. Ford. I can speak to this really quickly. Leading up to, so just a quick overview. My name is Zach. I'm the Director of Municipal Services for the City of Wauwatosa, formerly our Deputy City Clerk. So this past fall, we had the presidential election. And one thing that was very important to my team was kind of exactly what was just referenced of, we noticed in our office, we regularly get questions from both voters and our poll workers about how elections work. And so we thought, what resources are available to us to put out some communications and to educate? We have about 450 people in the community who are interested in being poll workers. Like we have a database where we keep all of these people logged and whatnot, but we had about maybe 300 people work with us in November. And so what we did was kind of a series of just simple emails about, this is a question we're getting a lot, or these third-party groups, sometimes they send out voter registration or absentee application forms. That's a big thing. And so we just spent, maybe a couple minutes drafting an email to send to our several hundred poll workers, and then ask them, if this ever comes up in a conversation that you're having with a neighbor or a friend or a family member, now you have the information. And it kind of, we definitely found it very helpful. Our poll workers found it very, very helpful, and they appreciated it. So that's I think knowing what resources you have available to you and what you're trying to accomplish is very important. I have other thoughts about civil discourse and dialogue and things like that, but I don't want to get too far off track.
I'll be sure to harass you, Zach. We'll need you. Well, we're up against it, 1 o'clock. I thank you all for coming. I know Lisa's got the go away here, but thank you all for listening.
Yep, we want to thank all of you for coming today. And if you have any further questions, you can email the Whitburn Center at whitburncenter@uwosh.edu. And we also invite you to join us for April's virtual Whitburn Wednesday event on April 16th at noon, titled Improving Language Access in Oshkosh Through Campus Community Partnerships. 4 of our faculty fellows will be presenting the research there. So we'll send out details closer to the date. So thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.